Rain drummed on the roof of the old Volvo with such a steady rhythm it felt like someone was counting down the seconds to an explosion. Max gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, even though the road had been empty for the last 30 miles. Beside him, slouched in the passenger seat, Eliza stared out the window. She didn't see the trees flashing past or the fog. She was looking at her own reflection, which felt foreign to her. "Are you sure the GPS isn't wrong?" Max's voice cut through the silence like a dull knife. "The GPS isn't wrong, Max. People are, often, regularly." She didn't even turn her head. They were driving to Shadow Creek, an estate Max had inherited from an uncle no one ever talked about. This was their final stop before signing the divorce papers. 1 week alone, just the two of them, to clear things up. Though they both knew, the dots had long since turned into stains of tears and wine. When the tires crunched onto the gravel driveway, the house rose before them, massive, weather-beaten. Its dark windows looked like empty eye sockets. "Looks cozy," Eliza said sarcastically as she stepped out of the car. Cold air instantly slipped beneath her cashmere coat. "Better than sitting in the apartment waiting for another delivery from your friends," Max shot back over his shoulder as he pulled out the suitcases. Inside, the house greeted them with the smell of dust and old wood. The ceilings were high, and the shadows cast by the hallway lamps stretched unnaturally long. They drifted into separate corners, avoiding accidental touches, as if the other person were contagious. An hour later, they sat at a massive oak table in the dining room. Dinner consisted of frozen meals and a bottle of expensive red wine they'd bought 2 years earlier for their anniversary. "Are you still talking to him?" Max asked suddenly, staring at his plate. Eliza froze with her glass midair. Slowly, she raised her eyes. In the candlelight, her face looked like a porcelain mask. "Which one?" she said calmly. "My list of sins has more than one name, as you love to remind me. Or are we talking about Mark? The bastard who sent you flowers at work while I was on a business trip in Berlin?" Eliza laughed, a dry, lifeless sound. "And what about your assistant, Julia, the one who accidentally left her lipstick in our glove compartment? You know, Max, I actually like that shade. It matches the color of your lying face." Max shot up from his chair. It scraped violently across the floor before slamming into the wall. "I didn't come here for this," he snapped. "I wanted to—" "What?" Eliza stood to, bracing her hands on the table. "To buy your forgiveness in the middle of nowhere? There's no audience here, Max. No one to perform for. No one to pretend we're the perfect couple. We're just two corpses who haven't fallen yet." At that moment, something in the house changed. The temperature dropped so sharply that a faint cloud of breath escaped Eliza's lips. The candles on the table began to flicker, even though there was no draft. "The hell?" Max muttered, looking around. Then a sound came from the kitchen. Loud, sharp, the unmistakable clang of metal, as if someone had hurled a set of knives onto the floor. They froze, staring at each other. For a brief moment, the hatred vanished from their eyes, replaced with raw, primal fear. "Did you hear that?" Eliza whispered. Her confidence was gone. "Stay here," Max said, taking a step toward the doorway, then stopping. On the polished surface of the dining table, right between them, moisture began to appear. It wasn't water. The liquid seeped from the very grain of the wood, forming letters, crooked, uneven, slowly assembling into a sentence that made Max go pale. "You are both guilty. The price is truth." "This isn't funny, Eliza," Max hissed, backing away. "Did you come here earlier? Is this some sick trick to drive me insane?" "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice trembled. "I was in the car with you for the last 5 hours." Suddenly, the lights in the entire house went out, plunging them into absolute darkness. And in that darkness, Eliza felt a cold, slimy hand clamp tightly around her wrist. But Max was standing on the other side of the table. The darkness inside the house wasn't just the absence of light. It felt dense, like spilled ink. Eliza screamed as the cold fingers tightened their grip around her arm. It wasn't a human touch. It felt as if ice had wrapped around her wrist and was beginning to grow into her skin. "Max!" Her voice broke into a shrill, near-ultrasonic pitch. "I'm here. I can't see anything." His voice came from somewhere far away, even though he should have been standing no more than a meter from her. Max frantically dug through his jeans pocket. Finally, the flashlight on his phone flicked on. The beam sliced through the darkness, catching Eliza's pale face. She was standing alone. No one was beside her, but 5 bluish-black fingerprints were clearly visible on her white skin. "What the hell is this?" Max stepped closer, his hand shaking as he swept the light across the room. The writing on the table was gone. In its place was only a scorched, dry patch of wood. "Someone was here, Max. Someone was holding me." Eliza pressed her damaged arm to her chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, all her former arrogance completely gone. "There's no one here. The house is old. The wiring must have shorted out." Max tried to sound rational, but his voice betrayed him, trembling. "Let's go to the car. Screw this vacation. We're leaving, now." They rushed into the entryway. Max yanked on the heavy oak door. It didn't budge. He slammed his shoulder into it. Nothing. "Locked? I didn't lock it." "Try a window," Eliza shouted. He ran to the large living room window, grabbed a heavy bronze candlestick and swung with all his strength. The sound was like metal striking stone. The candlestick rebounded, nearly snapping Max's wrist. Not even a scratch appeared on the glass. "That's impossible," he whispered, striking the window again and again. "It's just glass." Suddenly, his phone screen flickered and went black. "Damn it, the battery was at 80%. "Mine shut off too," Eliza's voice echoed from deep in the hallway. "Max, come here. Now." He felt his way toward her through the dimness, guided by a faint glow coming from the first-floor bathroom. There, on a large mirror set in a gilded frame, something glowed with a dull, phosphorescent light. It was writing. The exact words he used as the password for his hidden safe, the one where he kept documents for properties Eliza wasn't supposed to know about. Intimate details of his backup plan in case of divorce. "Orchid 2022, Eliza read aloud. She slowly turned toward him. Fear began to mix with a poisonous fury. "That's the password to your safe, isn't it? The one where you hid the money you siphoned from our joint account." How do you, Eliza, I didn't write that. You set all this up. These are cheap tricks to force a confession before court, aren't they? You hired someone." "You're sick," she screamed. "Something just tried to strangle me and you're thinking about your money? Look at my wrist." She raised her arm to show him the bruises, but in the mirror they saw something else. Max's reflection began to live its own life. It didn't move with him. The reflected Max slowly pulled a phone from his pocket and started typing a message. Eliza could read the text in the mirror. "She suspects nothing. It'll all be over soon, sweetheart." That was last Tuesday," Eliza whispered, stepping back. "You sent that to her while I was sitting right next to you, crying about my father's death." "Eliza, it's not what you think," he began, but at that moment the mirror exploded into 1,000 shards. One of them sliced deeply into Max's cheek, but instead of falling to the floor, the shards froze in midair. They began to spin, forming a vortex at the center of which a silhouette started to take shape. It was a tall male figure, but its face kept changing, shifting into Eliza's lover, then into Julia, then into a twisted version of Max himself. "You want the truth?" the voice whispered, sounding like 1,000 broken lives at once. "The house will give it to you, but every lie you keep will cost you a piece of your flesh." The floor beneath them began to sink, turning into an unstable swamp of dust and memories. "Run!" Max grabbed Eliza's hand, and this time she didn't pull away. They charged up the stairs, and behind them the steps vanished, collapsing into a bottomless void filled with the laughter of those they had once betrayed. They burst onto the second floor, choking on dust and adrenaline. Max slammed the bedroom door shut and braced it with his shoulder. The landing behind them had turned into nothingness, a void filled with thick, ashen fog. The house was no longer an architectural structure. It had become a living organism, digesting their past. "This can't be real. It's a hallucination." Eliza curled into the corner of the bed, wrapping her arms around her knees. Her breathing was ragged. "Max, tell me we're just on something, that you slipped something into my wine, please." Max didn't answer. He stared at his hands. Blood from the gash on his cheek dripped onto the floor, but it didn't spread. Each drop hardened into a small black sphere that rolled beneath the bed. "I wish it were me, Eliza," he finally forced out. His voice sounded dry, unfamiliar. "But I don't have that kind of power." Suddenly, the bedroom walls began to change. The wallpaper shuddered, blooming with damp stains that rapidly spread, taking on the shapes of human bodies. Something thick began dripping from the ceiling, sticky, cloyingly sweet in smell. "Look," Eliza whispered, pointing at the wall opposite the bed. There, emerging directly from concrete and wood, a figure began to form. It was a man, tall, athletic, with a distinctive jawline. Eliza recognized him instantly. Mark, the man she had been cheating with for the past year. But this Mark was wrong. His skin was gray, and his eyes were completely black, no whites at all. "You're ideal, isn't he?" A whisper came from everywhere at once. "The one who listened to you, the one who gave you what he never could." Mark stepped out of the wall. His movements were jerky, like a broken marionette. In his hand, he held a long kitchen knife, the same one Max had just used to chop vegetables for dinner. "Max, that's not him! That's not Mark!" Eliza screamed as the apparition moved toward Max. Max grabbed a heavy floor lamp, ripping it from the outlet, and raised it to strike. "Of course it's not him. It's this damn house messing with us. Eliza, bit up. We need to get out through the balcony." He swung the lamp, but Mark was unnaturally fast. The apparition caught the blow, and Max was hurled into the wall with such force that books flew from the shelves. Eliza rushed toward Max, but her path was blocked by another figure rising straight from the floor. It was Julia, Max's mistress. Her face was twisted with rage, and black smoke poured from her mouth instead of words. She held a broken wine bottle, the same one they'd shared at dinner. "You're both so pathetic," the shadow Julia hissed. "You destroyed each other for years. You killed your us a long time ago. We're just here to finish the job." The trap closed. They were cornered in the room with physical manifestations of their betrayal. "Eliza." Max staggered to his feet, wiping blood from his chin. He looked at his wife. For the first time in a long while, there was no irritation or hatred in his eyes, only terror and a sliver of understanding. "They're getting stronger when we face them separately." "What do you mean?" Eliza recoiled from the shard of glass Julia raised to strike. "We have to admit it, together," Max shouted, grabbing Mark's arm as the knife lunged toward his chest. "Eliza, I cheated on you because I was afraid of your success. I needed to feel like the one in control, somewhere, anywhere. It was weakness, cowardice." As he spoke the words, Julia shuddered, her silhouette turning faint and translucent. "Your turn," he yelled to Eliza, barely holding back the monster. "Say it, not to me, to him, to yourself." Eliza looked into Mark's empty black eyes. I didn't love him," she screamed. "I used him to hurt you, to make you feel even a fraction of the pain you caused me with your indifference." The room convulsed with a violent shockwave. The apparitions let out a piercing scream and collapsed into fine black ash that instantly settled into the carpet. The walls stopped trembling, but the silence that followed was worse than the screams. They stood in the middle of the ruined bedroom, breathing hard, staring at each other across a field of debris. "That was just the beginning, wasn't it?" Eliza asked quietly. Max walked to the balcony window. Beyond it, there were no mountains, no forest, only endless white emptiness swallowing the world around the house. "There's no way back," he said, turning to her. "We're locked in here with everything we've done, and the house has only just begun blurring the line between memory and reality." He held out his hand. She hesitated for only a second before placing her palm in his. Their fingers intertwined, and for the first time in many years, it wasn't a gesture of ownership, but the grip of two people drowning. The air in the bedroom grew so thick that every breath required effort, as if their lungs were filling with wet cotton. The white emptiness beyond the window began to pulse, and then the walls of the room simply melted away. Max and Eliza didn't even have time to scream before they found themselves in a restaurant. It was L'Avenue, their favorite place, but something was wrong. The colors had faded into sepia tones, and the patrons sat perfectly still, like wax figures. Are we back in the city?" Max looked around, but the voice didn't come from his mouth. He felt a strange weight in his body. He looked down and saw Eliza's silk blouse on himself. He raised his hand. It was a slender female hand, wearing the wedding ring he had given her 5 years earlier. "Max?" Eliza's voice sounded, but it came from the figure sitting across from him. Eliza was now in Max's body. They had switched places inside the memory. "I can feel your headache," Eliza whispered, trapped in Max's body, clutching her temples, "and that metallic taste in your mouth." "And I can feel your nausea," Max replied, now in Eliza's body, "and how fast your heart is pounding. Eliza, this is that night, October 4th. It was the night Max had said he'd be working late and instead went to meet Julia. Now, trapped in Eliza's body, Max felt the phone vibrate inside her purse. He took it out. On the screen was a photo, Max at a bar, laughing, his arm wrapped around another woman. The message came from an anonymous sender. Max felt something snap inside Eliza's chest. It wasn't just anger, it was a physical detonation. A cold, sticky terror spread through her veins, locking her lungs. He felt her fingertips go numb from the pain of betrayal. He lived the moment she realized her entire world was a house of cards. "So this is how it felt for you," Max whispered in her voice. Tears streamed down his cheeks, unstoppable. "I thought you were just being dramatic. I didn't know that you literally couldn't breathe." "And Eliza said inside Max's body, staring at her large masculine hands, "I can feel your pressure, Max, that endless need to prove you're successful, the fear that if you weren't the best, I'd stop loving you. God, there's so much fear inside you." The restaurant began to crack like old porcelain. "You are seeing the roots of your poison," the house's voice murmured, now like the rustle of dry leaves. "But seeing is not healing. To move forward, you must take this pain from each other." In an instant, they were back on the bedroom floor of the estate, in their own bodies. But something was different. A bloodstain began to bloom across Max's chest, exactly where Eliza had felt the hollow void of betrayal in the memory. And Eliza's arm began to darken and swell, mirroring Max's internal pressure and fear. "The house is materializing our emotions," Max gasped, clutching his chest. It's transferring my inner filth onto your body and your pain onto mine. We're literally killing each other, Eliza shuddered as pain shot through her arm. Max, if we don't stop this, we're going to break apart inside these walls. She crawled toward him. The light in the room dimmed further and the walls began to close in, slowly shrinking the space. We have to go to the basement, Max whispered. I can feel it. The source. Whatever's holding us here, it's calling us by name. They stood, leaning on each other, not like lovers, but like wounded soldiers on a battlefield. Every step echoed with the other's pain, and now that pain was the only thread tying them to reality. The stairs leading down to the basement seemed endless. They were damp, slick, and smelled of iron and wet earth. Every step they took produced a sound disturbingly close to a human moan. Max went first, pressing a hand to his chest where the bloodstain continued to spread, pulsing in rhythm with his heart. "Do you feel that?" Eliza whispered, gripping the edge of his shirt. Her arm was no longer just bruised. The veins had turned black, as if ink were spreading beneath her skin. "I feel it," Max forced out. "The house wants us to stop. It wants us to fall here." When they reached the bottom, heavy metal doors creaked open before them, revealing a strange room. It was filled with mirrors, but none of them reflected reality. Inside each pane, vortices of their darkest moments spun endlessly. Screaming matches, slammed doors, anonymous calls, moments when they hated each other so deeply they wanted to disappear. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table. On it lay a single object, a pair of rusted garden shears. "The Chamber of Atonement," the house's voice boomed, now loud and commanding. "To leave this place, one of you must surrender what you hold most precious, not something material, a part of yourself that feeds your pride." Suddenly, the mirrors began to crack, releasing thick black smoke. From the smoke emerged thorny vines, sharp like briars. They slithered rapidly across the floor and wrapped around Max's legs. "Max!" Eliza screamed. She rushed toward him, but the vines hurled her against the wall. The thorns dug into Max's flesh, soaking his pants with blood. "It's taking me." Max collapsed to his knees, his face turning bluish pale. "Eliza, run! The door behind you, it's still open. Go! Sign the papers. Take everything. Just go." This was the Max she knew, selfish, willing to do anything to save himself. But now there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't asking her to stay and save him. For the first time in years, he was asking her to save herself. Eliza looked at the door. Freedom was a single step away. She could leave this nightmare behind, along with the man who had betrayed her so many times. Her arm throbbed violently, the black veins burning, reminding her of every wound he'd caused. "No," she said, and her voice was unexpectedly steady. She didn't run for the exit. Instead, she lunged for the table and grabbed the rusted garden shears. "Eliza, what are you doing?" Max shouted, struggling as the vines crept toward his throat. "You always said my heart was stone, Max," she said, stepping toward him, ignoring the thorns biting into her legs. "That I loved my pride more than I loved you." She pressed the blades against her forearm, the same arm darkened by the manifestation of his fear. "I give up my righteousness. I give up my right to be the victim in this story." She dragged the blade across her skin. But instead of blood, a brilliant white light burst from the wound. The black veins vanished instantly, and the vines strangling Max ignited, collapsing into ash. Max fell forward, gasping for air. The stain on his chest began to seal before their eyes. Eliza sank down beside him, exhausted, yet strangely light inside. "Why?" he whispered, staring at her in horror and awe. "You could have left." "I already left, Max," Many times, she said softly, touching his cheek. Even when I was sitting in the same room with you, I was already far away. But here, there's nowhere to run from yourself. The house shuddered with rage. The mirrors exploded one by one, showering them in shards of glass. You think sacrifice is the end? It is only the beginning of payment. Blood has mixed with ash. The pact is sealed. The floor beneath them began to drop rapidly, opening a path into the darkest part of the estate, a place where not just memories were stored, but their true essences. They didn't fall for long, yet it felt as if their bodies had been sifted through a sieve of shattered glass. When the motion finally stopped, Max and Eliza found themselves in a strange place. It wasn't a basement. It was an exact replica of their bedroom in the city apartment, but everything was made of white, damp paper. The walls, the bed, even the flowers in the vase, all of it fragile, colorless, ready to tear at the slightest touch. "This is our home," Eliza whispered, brushing her fingers along the wall. The papers softened beneath her hand and split open, revealing nothing but emptiness behind it. "Not quite," Max said, stepping toward the desk. "This is what our home became, a set piece, a void pasted over with wallpaper." A figure appeared in the center of the room. It had no face, only a smooth, mirror-like surface. In its hands were two empty glass bowls. "You have given flesh, but not essence," the voice said, now vibrating deep within their bones. "Every betrayal was a brick in this prison. To bring the walls down, you must pour into these bowls the worst truth, the one you never admitted, even to yourselves." Max looked at Eliza. His face was gray with exhaustion. "I'll go first," he said. His voice no longer trembled. "Eliza, you think I cheated on you because of Julia because she was better? No, I hated her. I cheated because I wanted you to find out. I wanted to hurt you, to finally make you look at me instead of your screen, your reports, your perfect little world. I was a pathetic man trying to get his wife's attention by setting his own house on fire." As he spoke, a thick black liquid began to fill his bowl. Pride turned into bile. Eliza stepped forward, staring at her reflection in the faceless figure. "My turn. Max, you know about Mark. You think it was revenge, but the truth is worse. I wanted him to kill me, not literally. I wanted him to destroy the woman I had become with you. I wasn't betraying you. I was betraying myself, trying to find something, anything, still alive inside a body you'd turned into an ice statue with your criticism and your coldness. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for ruin." Her bowl filled with a red liquid, wine-colored but bitter in its weight. "The pact is sealed," the voice whispered. "Now drink. Drink each other's truth." Max took Eliza's bowl. She took his. This was the final threshold, not just accepting the worst in your partner as a fact, but absorbing it as part of yourself. They drank. In an instant, the world exploded. The paper room ignited in cold flame. Max tasted the bitterness of her despair. Eliza felt the sickly sweetness of his loneliness. It was agony, nearly unbearable, yet through the pain came a strange purification. The paper walls collapsed, and they found themselves back in the real dust-filled basement of the estate. But something had changed. They no longer felt the weight of the house pressing down on them. Between them stretched a thin, barely visible silver thread of energy. "We're not free yet," Max said, helping Eliza to her feet. "The house is quiet, but it's the quiet before the storm." "It's preparing its final strike," Eliza said, looking toward the stairs leading up. On the first floor, real fire was already beginning to burn, raw and orange. "It wants to burn us together with our sins." "Then run," Max said, gripping her hand tightly. This time, we don't look back.
The air in the mansion's corridors had turned scorching. Smoke, thick and sweet like burning letters, flooded the space. But this was no ordinary fire. The flames shimmered with a violet hue and didn't burn skin. They burned memory. Max and Eliza burst onto the first floor, but the living room was gone. In its place stretched an endless gallery of doors. Each one was a passage into a life that could have been. "Stop," the house said. The voice no longer echoed from the walls. It spoke from inside their own thoughts. "You've walked through pain. You've been purified. Why return to a world where only debt, gossip, and the ashes of your marriage await?" One door swung open before Eliza. Beyond it lay a sunlit Italian coastline. She stood there, happy, free, successful. There was no Max, no Mark. She was whole. "One step, Eliza," the entity whispered, "and you'll forget the pain. You'll forget Max. You'll simply walk out of this house into a new life. No scars on your wrists." Eliza froze. The temptation was almost physical. This was everything she had dreamed of for the past 5 years, to erase this chapter from her biography as if it never existed. "Eliza?" Max's voice sounded weak. He stood by another door. Inside it, he saw himself in a corner office atop a glass skyscraper, surrounded by respect and power. There, he wasn't the failed husband intimidated by his wife's success. There, he was king. "It's offering us the easiest path," Max said, staring into his perfect reality. "We just have to let go of each other's hands, right now. You go to your heaven, I go to mine. No one gets hurt." Eliza looked at him. His shirt was smeared with blood and dust, his face drawn and exhausted, yet his eyes held the most honest expression she had ever seen. She thought of the cold perfection behind her door. "In that life," she began, her voice shaking, "in that life, I would never know you were willing to die for me in that basement. I would never know who I really am without this armor." Max smiled for the first time in a long while. A real smile, a sad one. "In my paradise, there is no you, Eliza, which means it's just another beautiful prison." They turned away from the open doors at the same time. "We choose the dirty truth," Max shouted into the void. "We choose our shared ashes." The doors slammed shut with thunderous force. The gallery began to collapse. Real orange fire licked the wallpaper. Now the house was truly enraged. It didn't want to let them go. It wanted to consume them. The house began to contract. The space around them felt like the insides of a monster. The stairs turned into slick spines and the ceiling lowered, threatening to crush them. "We have to get to the main entrance," Max shouted over the roar. But their path was blocked by the wall of shadows. These weren't just memories. They were every word left unsaid, every resentment they had nursed for years. The shadows lunged at them, trying to pry their hands apart. "Don't let go. No matter what you see, don't let go." Max pulled Eliza close. He swung an old bronze candlestick like a weapon, but the shadows were elusive. That's when Eliza understood. They couldn't defeat the house with force. It was a mystical organism feeding on their division. "Max, listen to me," she pressed her back against his. "They feed on our hatred. We have to change the rhythm." She began to speak, not about betrayal, not about pain, but about what they had almost forgotten. "Do you remember that little cafe in Prague, when we got soaked in the rain and you gave me your last dry sweater?" "I remember," he answered, fending off another shadow. "And do you remember how we spent the whole night watching the stars on the roof of your first apartment, promising we'd never become boring adults?" With every warm memory, the flames around them grew brighter, but less aggressive. The shadows began to melt. They pushed through the living room, where furniture floated through the air like the eye of a tornado. Max scooped Eliza into his arms when the floor gave way beneath her and leapt across a chasm that fell into nothingness. They moved as a single mechanism. Years of distance vanished in this dance on the edge of death.
When they reached the massive front doors, they were engulfed in flames. "Together," Eliza commanded. They charged into the doors. The wood cracked but did not give way. The house let out one final desperate roar. The ceiling above them began to collapse. A massive oak beam was falling straight toward Eliza. Max reacted faster than thought. He didn't just push her away, he covered her with his body, taking the blow himself. The beam pinned him to the floor right at the threshold of the exit. "Max, no!" Eliza dropped beside him, trying to lift the heavy wood. "Run, Eli, the doors are open," he rasped. Blood spilled from his mouth, but he was smiling. The house around them began to explode with light.
Eliza didn't run. She grabbed the beam with such force that her fingernails began to bleed. "I'm not leaving you in this prison. We either get out together or we burn here together. That is my choice." Suddenly, the beam became light as paper. The house shuddered one last time and fell silent. The flames vanished in an instant. Eliza opened her eyes. They were lying on wet grass. There was no burning mansion before them, only an empty foundation, overgrown with moss and old shrubs, as if no house had stood there for 50 years. The Volvo sat on the driveway, covered in a layer of dust. Max lay beside her. He was alive, but his face was pale. He slowly sat up, touching his chest. No wound, only a torn shirt. Are we free?" he whispered. Eliza looked at her hands. The bruises from the shadow's fingers were gone, but on her right wrist remained a thin, barely visible white scar shaped like a loop. She looked at Max's hand. He had the same one. "Yes," she said, stepping closer to him. "But look." She pointed to the car. On the windshield, beneath the layer of dust, a single word had been written with a finger. "Play." They got into the car in complete silence. Max started the engine. As they pulled onto the main road, Eliza accidentally glanced into the rearview mirror. For a moment, it seemed to her that the shadow with the mirrored face was sitting in the back seat. She blinked. The seat was empty. "Max," she called softly, "you understand we didn't become normal, right? What happened in the house, it didn't disappear." Max didn't take his eyes off the road, but he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I know. We're bound now by something worse than marriage, and something better than love. We know everything about each other, and that house, it didn't vanish. It's inside us now." Eliza opened her purse to find her lipstick and froze. There, among her things, lay the same rusty garden knife from the basement. Beside it was a note written in Max's handwriting, though he couldn't have put it there. "Next time, truth won't be enough." She slowly closed the bag and looked at her husband. He felt her gaze and turned his head for a moment. In his pupils, for a fraction of a second, flickered the same violet flame of the mansion. They didn't go home. They drove forward into the fog, knowing that their game was only beginning. And this time, the rules were not theirs to make.